You smell her before you see her, not in a bad way. Nothing's ever bad in her presence. Everything is too fragrant, too smooth, too well rehearsed. The scent wafting through the atrium is some chaotic blend of rose oil, cinnamon bark, and the unmistakable sting of danger hidden in luxury. You breathe it in like incense, but deeper down, you know it's more like a warning. Like what you're seeing, hit like, subscribe, and share your thoughts in the comments. I'm always reading them. The Empress Valeria Messalina isn't late. She never arrives on time because on time is for senators and people with unpaid debts. No, she appears, materializes. One moment it's just chatter, the clink of goblets and the whir of silk sleeves. The next there's a hush, and suddenly everyone's standing a little straighter. And there she is, barefoot in the mosaic corridor, trailing a robe stitched with pearls so small they look like dew, eyes glittering like someone just told her a secret about you. You try not to tremble, because here's the first lesson everyone learns in Messalina's Rome. The most dangerous woman in the empire doesn't need to shout. She just smiles, and you spend the rest of the day wondering if it meant anything, or everything. She likes it that way. Messalina was young when she married Emperor Claudius. Some say she was just 15. Others argue 17. Historians still argue whether she was chosen for her lineage, her beauty, or just because Claudius was tired of being rejected. Either way, the match elevated her from a patrician girl with decent eyebrows to the most powerful woman in the known world, Empress by name, nightmare by reputation. And she used that power with a kind of lazy precision. You're sitting at dinner now, not a formal banquet, those come later, but a casual meal, where the guest list has been curated like a bouquet of carefully clipped rivals. You're here because you're too valuable to ignore and too dangerous to trust. Perfect. Messalina reclines on her couch. She doesn't eat much. She's too busy watching. She asks about your family, your health, your recent poetry contest loss. You answer carefully, every syllable like a coin you're offering at a toll bridge. She nods, amused. And then she says something like, "Oh, I hear you've been spending time with Silius lately." Now, Marcus Silius is a problem. Handsome, magnetic, with arms like marble columns, and a reputation for betting half the imperial court, including, rumor has it, Messalina herself. Or maybe not. Maybe that's just gossip. You can't ask. You don't ask. But when she says his name, she doesn't blink, doesn't raise an eyebrow, just lets it hang in the air like perfume smoke. You laugh politely and change the subject. You've passed, for now. But others, they aren't so lucky. Take Agrippina the Younger. Yes, that Agrippina, sister of Caligula, future mother of Nero, and, crucially, a cousin of Messalina's. She was exiled once already, and when she returned to Rome, guess who orchestrated a whisper campaign so effective? It nearly got her removed from every dinner party within a 100-mile radius. That's right, Messalina. She didn't shout. She didn't accuse. She leaned into courtiers' ears and said things like, "I do hope Agrippina's recovered from her incident," then smiled, walked away. Soon, Agrippina was radioactive. Another of her rivals? Poppaea Sabina the Elder, a beautiful, articulate, annoyingly admired woman. Too admired. The kind of woman whose presence Messalina saw as a mirror, and she hated mirrors unless she was the one holding them. Poppaea was summoned for a friendly discussion about property claims. She returned home and found her estate had been reclassified as, imperially adjacent. That's not a legal term, but when Messalina uses it, it becomes one. Within weeks, Poppaea's family quietly relocated. Some say they never stop traveling. And then there's the pillow talk. That's where Messalina shines. You think being in her bed is about pleasure? Please. It's about confession. She listens when men are soft, dazed, drunk on wine and her perfume. She coaxes names out of them, promises, favors, secrets. Tell me who hates Claudius most, she murmurs, trailing her finger across a man's chest. Whose loyalty do you doubt? They think it's just flirtation. They're wrong. 2 weeks later, that name is summoned. Investigated, transferred, forgotten. She never threatens. That's the art of it. And because you're still here, still breathing, you've learned to spot the signs. When she tilts her head slightly to the right, she's calculating how many people in the room are expendable. When she touches the rim of her goblet twice in one sentence, she's testing a theory. When she smiles without showing her teeth, someone's about to vanish. But not you. Not today. Still, the fear lingers, like a strand of hair you can't quite find clinging to your cheek, because Messalina doesn't just eliminate rivals, she replaces them, softly, effortlessly. She once heard a senator's wife say, "No one could match my influence at court." The next week, that woman's personal stylist was reassigned. Her dinner invitations dried up. Her husband was offered a promotion in a distant province, and just like that, the woman's influence became something people whispered about in past tense. And the stylist now works for Messalina, of course. And here's your fringe tidbit. Some claim Messalina used scent as a subtle weapon, that she had perfumes designed to trigger headaches or loosen tongues. One bottle labeled mirth allegedly made its wearers unnaturally honest. True? Probably not. But the rumor alone did half the work. People feared her powder room more than the Senate floor. You push back your chair, you bow, you thank her, and as you leave the room, you realize you didn't walk. You escaped. You didn't dine. You survived. And her eyes, they're still on you, still smiling, just enough to make you wonder what secret you almost gave away. The smell of roasted peacock and honey-glazed dormice fills the air, thick enough to smother your better judgment. You're seated on an embroidered cushion, trying not to shift too much lest you wrinkle the borrowed tunic that's slightly too tight across your ribs. It's banquet night at the Domus, and Messalina is glowing. Not glowing like a woman in love, or a mother with a healthy baby. Glowing like an arsonist watching her third house burn beautifully to the ground. You're already half a goblet deep in Falernian wine, too sweet, too strong, when Messalina lifts her own cup. The room watches. The silence is the kind that only happens when everyone is pretending not to be terrified. She says, "To loyalty," and drinks. You follow suit because what else are you going to do? Not toast, not drink, not be loyal? Exactly. The banquet is a trap. Not literally, of course. There are no collapsing floors, no poison hidden in figs. Not this time. This one's a social ambush, subtle and surgical. It's a dinner where the wine is laced with suggestion, the jokes double-edged, and every raised eyebrow from Messalina slices clean through someone's public standing. Across from you is Senator Gaius Crispus, a man so smug he probably rehearses his own reflections. He's laughing too loud, flirting too hard. He's trying to charm the hostess. Big mistake. Messalina watches him with mild amusement. Then, out of nowhere, she says, "I hear your wife has taken an interest in military affairs." The room stills. Because everyone knows what that means. Wives don't take an interest in military affairs. That's code. That's a subtle accusation of overreach, of gossiping behind closed doors, maybe even of helping her husband scheme. It's all in the phrasing. Crispus stutters, says something about her just being curious. Messalina's eyes stay cool. Curiosity is dangerous, she says softly, even in good women. And just like that, Crispus's wife is one misstep away from exile. Maybe less. Maybe just one note from Messalina to the Praetorians. This is how she works. She doesn't use daggers. She uses dialogue. The banquet isn't food. It's theater. And everyone's been cast in a part they didn't audition for. You glance to your right, where a younger woman, Livia, you think, is sipping wine far too slowly. Messalina turns to her and smiles. You've met Narcissus, haven't you? Ah, there it is. Now, Narcissus is Claudius's freedman. Powerful, petty, obsessed with protocol. And apparently Livia once called him a slippery fish in fine robes during a dinner 3 weeks ago. That comment has somehow made it to Messalina. Livia turns pink, then white, then something in between, like a half-squeezed fig. I misspoke, she says. Messalina nods. Everyone does. Once. And the thing is, no one yells. No one accuses. No one says, off with her head. But a week later, Livia's family estate is under investigation for tax irregularities, and Livia is suddenly invited to no one's birthday. One spilled word at a banquet, and Messalina makes it stick like ink to a scroll. Historians still argue whether these banquets were premeditated purges or just opportunities Messalina couldn't resist exploiting. But the pattern's hard to ignore. Someone offends her. They dine with her. And by sunrise, they're socially extinct. Tonight's menu includes a dish called Lucanikai, which is suspiciously sausage-shaped and uncomfortably symbolic, given how often this kind of food accompanies deeply awkward revelations. Case in point, midway through the second course, Messalina leans toward a nobleman named Fuscus and says, loud enough for at least 4 guests to hear, I heard your concubine plays the lyre. Poorly. You almost snort wine, because everyone knows Fuscus doesn't have a concubine. Not officially. Which means either Messalina has confused him with someone else, or she knows something he thought was a secret. He goes pale, tries to laugh. It's the kind of laugh that says, I have definitely made a mistake, but I'm still deciding which one it was. The woman next to you, a scribe's wife with more jewelry than sense, whispers, she's going for his lands. Just watch. You do. Because that's another pattern. Messalina doesn't just ruin people emotionally, she strips them politically. If someone owns a convenient villa or has influence over a problematic senator, she finds a reason to eliminate them, casually, while chewing olives. In one famous incident, one that still gets murmured by lamplight, Messalina discovered that a rival named Domitia had a rare copy of the Julian Laws locked in a private library. Domitia was a collector of rare manuscripts and, more problematically, someone who could quote legal exceptions better than most senators. 2 days after attending one of these feasts, Domitia's villa was seized for state use. The library? Gone. The scrolls? Absorbed into the imperial archive? Domitia? Mysteriously relocated to a colder region with fewer scrolls and a significantly lower survival rate. Fringe tidbit? Some say Messalina would rehearse banter with her handmaidens before these dinners, testing jokes, planning false rumors, gauging how people might react. If a story hit just right, if a maid flinched or looked intrigued, it went into the performance. She wasn't just cruel, she was method, and she always had a backup line. One time, a particularly bold senator's wife tried to insult Messalina by suggesting she was more theatrical than imperial. Messalina's reply, "Oh, darling, the empire is a play. I just make sure I write the endings." Cue nervous laughter. Cue that senator being offered a prestigious diplomatic assignment somewhere in the freezing north. He took it. No one heard from him again. And so the feast continues. The food is divine. The wine flows. The laughter sounds genuine, if a little too sharp at the edges, and you, wisely, say almost nothing. You chew slowly. You nod thoughtfully. You pretend not to hear the bait when it's dangled. By the time the torches burn low and the guests begin to rise, you're exhausted. Not from eating, but from surviving. Because that's the trick. No one chokes at Messalina's banquets. No one collapses face first in the lentils. They just go home and find out, slowly, softly, that their life has been shifted sideways. And by then, she's already licking olive oil from her fingers, planning the next course. It's always the gardens. They lull you into a false sense of calm with their cypress-lined paths, their gently trickling fountains, and those drowsy bees nosing around the marjoram. Messalina knows this. That's why she stages her prettiest atrocities here. Tonight is no exception. You've been summoned for a stroll. Nothing formal. Just a late evening wander through the imperial gardens. The invitation is scrawled in Messalina's hand, though you're fairly sure she didn't write it herself. Her signature has a ghostwriter. Still, you go. Of course you go. You're met by a slave girl with a lamp and a perfumed scarf. She gestures for you to follow. You're not the only one. There are two others, noble women, both. One's Lady Paulina, a dignified widow with suspiciously well-maintained cheekbones. The other is Sabina, young, poised, and politically inconvenient. Her uncle opposes one of Messalina's allies in the Senate, which is basically the same as asking for trouble, in cursive. The three of you walk in silence beneath the lemon trees. You try not to glance over your shoulder. You try not to notice the way the path you're taking loops away from the main house, further from lamps, deeper into shadows. The lamp girl stops. You're near the reflecting pool now, where the moon always looks like it's drowning. There, at the far end, you see her, Messalina. She's seated on a carved bench beneath a fig tree, hair unbound, one foot lazily swaying above the grass, like she's keeping time to music only she can hear. She beckons, and you approach. You expect conversation, pleasantries, at worst an awkward compliment about your hairstyle. What you get is a question. Do you believe in truth? She asks. You hesitate. Paulina answers first. Of course, Your Majesty. Sabina, a beat later. Yes, in public life, especially. Wrong answer. Messalina laughs, just once, a sharp little puff of air, and says, Then let's reveal some. From the shadows behind the fig tree, a man steps forward. You recognize him. A low-ranking clerk from the palace archives. Quiet, forgettable. The kind of man you only remember when he sneezes too loudly during hearings. He's holding a wax tablet. I took statements, he says, eyes down. Now your heart kicks. Paulina stiffens. Sabina swallows. The clerk begins to read. One quote, then another. All supposedly from Sabina. Accusations, insults, betrayals. She allegedly called Messalina more performer than ruler. Allegedly mocked Claudius. Allegedly conspired with her uncle to poison a rival. Sabina gasps. I never said that. Messalina shrugs. Then someone else used your mouth. Sabina drops to her knees, plating. Paulina turns ghost white. You stay still, because you've just realized what's really happening. This isn't about what Sabina said. This is about what people can be made to believe she said, and you're watching it in real time. Messalina waves a hand, and two guards appear as if summoned from the lemon trees themselves. They lift Sabina gently, too gently, and lead her away. She doesn't scream. That's the genius of it. She's not arrested. She's removed for questioning. It sounds polite, bureaucratic, but everyone watching knows what it means. Within days, Sabina's family estate is seized. Her uncle resigns. The charges? Never formally recorded. Her fate? Unclear. Some say she was sent to a coastal villa for re-education. Others claim she boarded a ship bound for Egypt and never arrived. A few swear she was seen wandering the Forum in rags years later. But you don't believe that. Messalina doesn't leave threads that visible. Historians still argue whether this entire event was orchestrated or if Messalina merely took advantage of an overheard comment. One camp insists the wax tablet was fabricated. Another suggests it was real, but manipulated. A third posits that Sabina never existed at all. Just a name on a list of women who once stood too tall. What's certain is that Messalina made an example, and she made it beautiful. That garden became infamous. Later, others called it the Theater of Leaves. Poems were written about it, usually anonymously, for safety. One particularly vivid line referred to Messalina's gaze as the moon's reflection, pretty, pale, and deep enough to drown in. Fringe detail? Some believe she chose that location because of a superstition, that the fig tree near the pool was sacred to Juno, protector of marriage, which made it all the more ironic, if not sacrilegious, when a woman's reputation was ruined beneath its branches. And Paulina? She was untouched, for now. She returns to court, quieter, more flattering, more prone to sudden gifts to Messalina's favorite stylists. You hear her murmur once, over wine, "Truth is a torch that burns the hand that carries it." You don't disagree. And then, just when you think the memory might fade, a new rumor blooms like a weed in the Senate halls. Someone claims they found a wax tablet with your name on it. You freeze, you smile through it, but your mind's already racing. Because this is the new trap. Not a banquet, not a letter, just the possibility of a truth. You wonder, did you say something? Did someone think you said something? Was it enough? You think back to the reflecting pool, the fig tree, the moon, and you start sleeping with your sandals on, just in case. You're jolted awake before sunrise. There's a knock at the door. Not the frantic kind, not even the aggressive kind. It's that soft, steady rhythm of someone with the paperwork and a reason. You already know what it means. You open the door to find a palace attendant, holding a scroll sealed in red wax and offering the kind of smile you associate with tax collectors and sudden funerals. By imperial request, he says. The scroll is addressed in that precise, too elegant handwriting, definitely not Messalina's, but it may as well be. You unroll it, and it's worse than you expected. You've been summoned to the records chamber. No accusation, no warning, just your name, a time, and a signature from Narcissus. The records chamber is where reputations go to slip down the drain. You go. Of course you go. Inside, it's colder than expected, not just because of the marble. It's that particular chill that comes from documents being used as weapons. Scrolls, tablets, wax seals. They line every shelf, every desk, each holding a story about someone who thought they were safe. Messalina isn't here, but her shadow is. Narcissus stands behind a table, flanked by scribes. He gestures politely to the seat across from him. "We've been cross-referencing correspondence," he says. "Your name came up in connection with a certain senator's wife." Your stomach tightens. You haven't spoken to that woman in weeks, months maybe, but you nod. Play it calm. Narcissus produces a tablet. "Can you confirm this handwriting?" You glance. It's not yours, but it looks close. The implication? Obvious. Messalina is forging letters again, or having someone forge them. She doesn't lower herself to ink and wax unless the outcome requires her personal flourish. But someone in her orbit, possibly even a maid with a grudge and excellent penmanship, is replicating messages. Not full fabrications, just enough to suggest betrayal, or loose lips, or both. The letter in question is addressed to Poppaea, the surviving daughter of a previously ruined noblewoman, and contains phrases like regretful loyalty and our cause must proceed quietly. Vague. Too vague. Which is exactly the point. If you deny it, you look guilty. If you confess, you are guilty. You say, I don't recall writing this. Narcissus nods, makes a mark on a scroll, then dismisses you. Just like that. But you know better. You know this is the first ripple. Soon, acquaintances will stop waving in the forum. Invitations will slow. You'll be reassigned to less desirable duties, judging poetry contests perhaps, or attending dull trade delegations. Death by administrative exile. This is what Messalina does best. She disappears people slowly. She begins with ink, then adds doubt, and finishes with locked doors. Take Calpurnia, one of her most elegant enemies, a former confidant, too witty by half. One wrong joke about Claudius's stutter, and suddenly she's receiving a forged summons to a non-existent council meeting at the edge of Rome. She arrives. No one's there, except guards. They don't arrest her. They just escort her to a villa on the coast. She's told it's temporary. It isn't. Historians still argue whether these methods were Messalina's own inventions or inherited from prior imperial wives. Some say she simply perfected what others attempted clumsily. Others argue she was uniquely surgical in how she wielded bureaucracy, using Rome's love of order against itself. All you know is this. Once a forged letter exists, it is the truth. There's no undoing it. And letters aren't her only tool. Sometimes as keys. She once had a rival's bedroom door locked from the outside in the middle of the night. Not to harm her, nothing that theatrical, just to delay her. So she'd miss a public ceremony and appear lazy, uninterested, maybe even drunk. By the time she finally arrived, disheveled, humiliated, the narrative had already calcified. She's unreliable, people whispered, not suited for court life. The woman tried to protest, tried to say the latch had jammed, but Messalina just smiled and said, "Doors open for those who know how to knock." Even when the woman left Rome, her nickname lingered. Clausa, the locked one. Another time, Messalina orchestrated the sudden disappearance of a rival's prized necklace, a gift from the emperor himself. When the theft was discovered, a slave girl conveniently remembered seeing that same rival lingering outside the treasury chamber earlier that week. It was enough. The woman wasn't punished officially, but her access to the palace revoked. She became a political ghost. Fringe detail? There's a persistent rumor that Messalina kept a personal book of silences, a scroll where she recorded the names of people who stopped speaking when she entered a room. Not those who said things, just those who went quiet. Because silence, she claimed, reveals more than sound. No one ever saw this scroll, but everyone believed it existed, which was enough, because that's the root of her genius. She understood that fear doesn't come from being punished. It comes from the possibility of being noticed. She made attention a threat. The final twist, you start finding strange gaps in your own records. Messages never received, invitations misdelivered, friends claiming they never heard from you, despite clear memories of writing them. Either you're going mad, or someone's rewriting your life in real time. You begin copying your correspondence twice, storing it in secret. You whisper to your own servants. You stop writing anything you wouldn't shout in the Senate. You begin to mistrust your own handwriting, and that's how it ends. Not with exile, not with arrest, but with doubt, the kind that follows you from room to room, From hallway to bathhouse, the kind that turns a glance into a threat, a missed message into sabotage, a silence into a verdict. And Messalina? She hasn't said your name in weeks, which is the loudest warning of all. It's not just a rumor, not just another whisper that drifts through the marble corridors of Rome and vanishes like steam off a bathhouse pool. It's real. Messalina got married. While still married to the emperor, the city doesn't know what to do with this information. It's like someone lit a bonfire in the middle of the Senate floor and then passed around marshmallows. The kind of scandal so stupidly bold, it has to be true. Because who would even invent that? But yes, it happened. You were there. Well, not in the room, but close enough to feel the tremors. The day starts normal. Whatever that means anymore. Messalina has been quieter lately, more elusive. She skips a few morning audiences, skims over court petitions. Her hair, still flawless, starts veering toward windswept rather than sculpted. Something's off. Then comes the invitation, hand-delivered, gold-trimmed, sealed with a non-imperial crest. You blink at the name, Gaius Silius. Yes, that's Silius. The handsome one. The one everyone's been whispering about for months. The one whose arms seem forged for carrying scandal. He's been in and out of Messalina's orbit long enough to start his own moon. And now, apparently, he's the groom. You think it's a joke, a prank, a test, the kind of trap Messalina would set just to see who shows up and how sweaty they look when they do. But the wedding happens. The venue? One of Messalina's private villas, well appointed, discreet, tastefully distant from the imperial eye. Guests? Carefully selected, not too many, not too powerful, enough to make it look real. Enough to let the story walk itself back into the city. She wears white, of course she does, with a wreath of myrtle in her hair like a virginal punchline. He wears the expression of a man who can't decide if he's the luckiest or the most doomed human alive. Probably both. They exchange vows in public, with witnesses, and you stand just outside the peristyle, pretending to look for a dropped earring, heart hammering in your chest because you know this isn't just a scandal, it's treason. Claudius is still emperor. Her husband is still alive. There's no annulment, no divorce, no plot to kill him. At least not one that succeeded. So, what is this? A joke? A dare? A power play so ludicrous that it loops back around to brilliant? Historians still argue whether Messalina believed Claudius would never find out, or if she thought he wouldn't care. Maybe she assumed his infamous indecisiveness would protect her. Maybe she just got drunk on love, or lust, or ego, or maybe, and this is the theory that haunts you, maybe she did it on purpose. A grand, glittering act of self-destruction designed to take others down with her. Because here's what comes next. Within hours, the guests scatter. Some pretend they weren't there. Others flee to their country homes. A few, bold or foolish, brag about it in whispers. Word spreads faster than ever. Because this isn't just salacious. It's impossible. It rips through Rome like a chariot on fire. Even Narcissus panics. Yes, Narcissus, the man who once had someone executed for folding a toga incorrectly. He hears the news, turns pale, and goes straight to Claudius. What he says exactly isn't recorded, but knowing Narcissus, it's something poetic like, "Your wife has committed bigamy with a man who has better teeth than you." Claudius blinks. Then, finally, after years of being led like a docile bull through palace politics, he reacts. He wakes up. He authorizes an investigation, then a purge, and finally, When the weight of it becomes undeniable, he orders her arrest. Just like that. One day she's draped in silk, exchanging vows under a laurel tree. The next, she's hiding in the gardens. You're told she fled in her nightgown, barefoot, clutching her son. You picture her stumbling across the lawn, eyes wild, breath ragged, looking over her shoulder for guards that haven't arrived yet. She seeks shelter in the house of a friend, or a former friend, or someone too afraid to say no. And she waits. She sends messages, pleas, bargains, apologies maybe, but they're not delivered fast enough. Or they are, and no one listens. That's the thing about power. It's beautiful when it's climbing. When it's falling, it's ugly, fast, inevitable. You hear what happens next in fragments. Claudius is hesitating. Still, even after everything, he's apparently considering a public trial, maybe even mercy. After all, they do have children. The Senate is divided. Some call for her execution. Others whisper that exile would be more merciful and more permanent. Narcissus doesn't wait. He sends an assassin. Just one. Efficient. Practiced. The final moment, according to fringe accounts, takes place in a garden, not unlike the one where she used to stage her little performances. She's offered a blade. Told to do it herself. She hesitates. Of course she does. Then it's over. Historians still argue whether the marriage to Silius was delusion, defiance, or desperation. Some say it was an attempted coup. Others believe it was love. Real love, ill-timed and poorly executed. And some just shake their heads and say, that's Rome. But you remember her as she was at that wedding, calm, radiant, terrifying, and above all, certain. That's the part that you can't forget. She looked certain, like she believed, truly, that the empire would bend around her madness, that Rome would forgive anything, so long as it was done in silk. And maybe she wasn't wrong, because in the days after her death, Rome tries to forget. The wedding is erased from records, portraits are removed, guests deny their presence. It's as if the event never happened, but you remember, you were there, and in the far corner of your villa, hidden beneath a loose tile, you keep the invitation, because no matter what the scrolls say, the bride wore white, and the bride wore treason. It's quiet now, too quiet. The kind of quiet that feels rehearsed. The kind you get when the actors have exited the stage and someone's sweeping up glitter behind the curtain. You walk through the palace and the echoes follow you like a rumor, still unsure whether it should die or grow legs. Messalina is gone, but somehow she's still everywhere. They tried to scrub her out, of course. Her name, stripped from records. Her portraits, burned or turned to face the wall. A handful of statues were chiseled clean, blank-faced reminders of a woman Rome would rather pretend was never empress at all. Even the tapestry in the Senate Hall, once embroidered with her likeness in ceremonial garb, was mysteriously damaged in a moth incident no one quite believes. You're not fooled. This isn't erasure, it's repackaging. And the worst part? It works. The new whispers don't start with, do you remember what she did? They start with, did she really do it? That's how fast it happens. Messalina, the orchestrator of destruction, the barefoot bride of treason, is already becoming a question mark. Because when people fear something enough, they reframe it. They call it a cautionary tale. They label it a lesson. They say that sort of thing only happens once. But you remember, you were there and you know better. A few weeks after her death, someone leaves a single hairpin on the steps of the Temple of Concord. Gold, snake-shaped. Rumor has it belonged to Messalina. Someone picks it up and faints. Whether from heat or symbolism, No one's sure. You start noticing strange things. Her former maid, one of the silent ones, always hovering near the perfume trays, is suddenly employed by a senator's wife. That wife begins rearranging her dinner invitations in suspiciously strategic patterns. Guests begin getting uninvited. Schedules shift. A few old enemies of Messalina find themselves gently nudged out of influence. No one mentions her name, but the choreography is familiar. Then there's the marble bench in the gardens. That garden, the one with the fig tree and the reflecting pool. It's been scrubbed, repainted, officially repurposed as a quiet retreat for contemplation. And yet, sometimes you see people standing near it, hesitating, adjusting their robes like they're preparing for something. Or someone. One day you find a wax tablet on your own writing desk. It's blank, completely untouched, except for the bottom corner where a single word is carved, small and deliberate. Remember. You don't tell anyone, not because you're scared, because you understand. Because this is her last trick. She doesn't haunt Rome through speeches or statues. She haunts through habits, through the weight of silence in a hallway, through the second glance at a closed door, through the act of rereading your own letters twice before you seal them. Even Claudius, her grieving not grieving husband, seems shaken. He remarries quickly, to Agrippina, of all people. Yes, that Agrippina, the one Messalina once tried to exile with perfume and shade. She returns with all the sharp edges of her youth honed into weapons. She doesn't crawl, she doesn't bow, and suddenly the court gets colder. But even Agrippina can't erase what's already been done. Messalina may be dead, but her template survives. The new empress uses different tools: adoption, ceremony, calculated motherhood, but underneath it all, the same root idea. Control the story, own the silence, use charm like a dagger with lace on the hilt. Fringe detail, someone somewhere starts collecting stories about Messalina, a scribe maybe, or a disgruntled lover, or a woman who once served her figs at a feast and saw something in her eyes that made her not eat any. The collection grows quietly, tells of banquets, of trap gardens, of the infamous wedding, and always the same pattern: disbelief. She couldn't have done that. She must have been manipulated. No one would risk so much, so stupidly. You sit with these doubts. Because here's the truth people forget. Messalina wasn't stupid. She was terrifyingly aware. She didn't destroy people by accident. She didn't make her palace into a labyrinth of whispers because she was bored. She did it because it worked. Until it didn't. And even then, it kind of still did. Because now, months later, you walk the palace with new caution. You double-check your correspondence. You second-guess a compliment, because maybe you are being watched. Maybe someone is taking notes. Maybe there's another Messalina waiting in the wings. Less reckless, more refined. Less bride, more shadow. Ready to pick up where the snake-shaped hairpin fell. You tell yourself you're imagining things. You say the empire is back to order. You convince yourself the days of veiled threats and forged letters are behind you. But when someone offers you an invitation, white parchment, clean script, you pause. Just a second too long. Because now every gesture carries weight. Every message might be the first line of your own ruin. And every silence sounds like her. Thank you for listening. I'll leave you here, at the edge of the garden, where the shadows look a little too arranged. We're always saying goodbye.